How many hours of radio on mortgage lending do you think you've done, Todd, like over the last 6 years?
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, potentially thousands.
And we've never really talked about fraud, even though it happens. We talked a little bit about title fraud last season, not a lot.
It's because we're trusting people, I think, inherently.
I think in Atlantic Canada, we are very, very trusting.
Yes,
but
right.
I mean, I think it does happen. A couple times a year, we get borrowers that might present us with questionable documents. And I think there's always these files that, may not smell 100% right. We do some additional due diligence or, talk to the lender to be like, hey, I think we need to really dig deep into this. But it impacts everyone. Not only does it impact, the lenders, it might impact the originator, but it impacts the borrower. And I think sometimes, we just want to, be approved because we want to have shelter. But I think there's people that do these frauds sometimes for profit, and it does happen. And there's a variety of different reasons that it might happen. And I think sometimes frauds are unintentional or people don't know. And we have a guest on, which I'm very excited about. This season, we've really strived to bring on more professionals from all kinds of different walks of life. Our last show, we brought on an engineer, construction,
Dan Monk.
A contractor, and, had a really great chat with him. And this month, we have brought on Sandi Burns. So we're going to pass the mic to Sandi so she can do a little intro. And
Sandi, introduce yourself. What are you all about?
Exactly.
What am I all about? So
I don't mean from like a philosophical standpoint. I meant
like
your
from
credentials.
a practical standpoint.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so
although we could talk philosophical.
I am more
I'm
than
sure we
happy
probably
to.
could.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe that'll be another segment.
Another time.
Yeah,
Another
absolutely.
Time. Yeah.
So my title sounds, I think, not very exciting. I'm an executive in.
Well, if your title's not exciting, then we can't have you on the show.
Okay, sorry. I'm just going to go there.
Imagine.
I'm in credit risk, specifically residential and retail credit risk. So I work a lot with residential mortgages. That's one of the key things that we work with. And so I kind of see the back end of what happens when folks are put into mortgages that they really can't afford. And that's a really big part of my
after
job.
the fact?
After the fact, yes.
How does that happen?
Well, sometimes I think Clinton really touched on a lot of those elements. So sometimes it's, I really want this house, but I kind of can't afford it. So I'm gonna fudge that letter of employment or fudge that pay stub just so I can get in.
Or you're maybe really good friends with your employer or something. Like I think that there's probably all layers of.
That's it.
It seems to me that would be illegal, would it not, to be submitting those types of documents?
Yeah, but I don't think a lot of folks really think about doctoring a letter of employment or a down payment statement, an investment statement, altering those numbers a little bit so they can get into their house. They don't see that as illegal. They don't see it as fraud. They think, I just really want this house and I want to qualify for it. So it's really important, I think, for folks like Clinton and his team to educate consumers, because you know what? It is fraud. It is illegal. But at the back end of it, if you're in a house that you really can't afford, you could end up in a position where the bank's foreclosing, and we're going to, unfortunately, we have to put that property up for sale, and you're not going to get the benefits of that sale, and it hurts your credit. It could potentially leave you without a home. So there's a lot of downstream impacts there that we really don't think about.
How common is this?
I think it's a lot more common than probably what we see,
and probably more than we even know. Like I do this every day, and very few times a year we see even questionable documents. But I'm sure at the lender side, like Sandi, you work for a medium-sized bank. I'm sure you guys see it a lot more than maybe an originator sees it.
Absolutely.
Plus, you guys have trained a whole probably team of people that are looking at these documents every day.
We do indeed. Yeah, there's a lot of red flags that we look for. At the end of the day, the biggest thing is common sense. You mentioned the sniff test. We call it spidey sense. Are your spidey senses tingling? Does this actually make sense? Does this person who's self-employed, who's making $200,000 a year, really make that much when there's no online presence, when there's no LinkedIn profile, when there's no social media that references their business or anything else? In today's world in particular, we have the ability to do a bit of a deeper dive on borrowers before we even bring them on as customers, just to make sure that this is legitimate, right?
Well, and as you're talking here, I mean, this is a human resource intense thing, what you're doing, right? In order to go through these files and flag these files, I would think that that banks can only dedicate and lenders will only dedicate a certain amount of resources to this.
Absolutely. And what we're faced with these days in particular, especially with fintechs on the rise, is people want answers immediately. They don't want to wait.
Yeah, it's competitive.
And it's very competitive. Yeah. But on the flip side, we also don't want to be putting fraud on the books. And so it's this, I think it's a tightrope act. Absolutely.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Because, just like think about one lender and clients, I understand sometimes, they feel like we need a blood sample sometimes to, get clients approved, whether it's income verification or whether we're verifying their down payment. But as much as we're trying to protect the bank, we're really trying to protect the borrower from themselves.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you touched on it. In terms of trends of like what you're seeing, would you say the majority of the frauds that your bank's seeing, is it fraud for shelter or is it more fraud for profit? Like, what's the difference between those frauds? And like, really at the end of the day, like, what are you guys seeing in terms of, trends?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We are seeing an increase in fraud for shelter. So that's, I'm looking for a house and maybe I don't have sufficient down payment or I don't have sufficient income to qualify. We really started to see an increase in fraud for shelter, I would say, in early pandemic days. And again, I hate referring back to the pandemic, but things really did shift astronomically for a lot of folks at that point, where employment was put on hold with a potential future return to work date. And so we started relying heavily on letters of employment.
Right.
Well, a letter of employment is a Word document that's pretty easy to doctor.
Yep.
And so we started to see fraud for shelter increase at that point. And then, of course, we went through the great migration through 2021 and 2022, where everyone wanted to go buy bigger houses.
And every third borrower we saw were from Ontario.
Absolutely.
And probably some that work for your bank were moving to Halifax and say, like, we're working from home forever.
Forever, exactly. And folks just weren't able to qualify. So again, doctoring a bit of the down payment, they were getting into bidding more, so all of a sudden they had to put more down than they anticipated. And now it's the interest rates. So fraud for shelter has skyrocketed over the last few years. I think year over year, it was up about 50%, which is insane. And then there's fraud for profit. And that's a group of people that get together that are going to try and make money.
That's the real criminal.
That's the criminal.
These are the ones that you're sending to jail, probably.
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly. Not me personally, but
maybe the police,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, and these are the folks that they have a group of people in the industry that are working together, and they really are trying to make money off of people who are maybe don't even know. So they're a part of identity fraud, where they're stealing identity, a part of title fraud that we saw quite prevalent in Ontario, or they're just saying to folks, hey, we can get you into a mortgage that you can't qualify anywhere else. People aren't asking questions, they're just going for it.
Well, recently, I'm involved in a lot of, associations and Facebook groups and stuff like that in terms of the mortgage industry. There was a billboard in Ontario to say, everyone's approved, no docs required. And, I always ask myself, I'm like, if they're not doing the due diligence, and even if it is a private lender or a high risk lender, what's saying that you can actually afford those funds that you're borrowing? And I think that just for me as an originator, just asks, I have so many questions that come up.
Absolutely.
It's scary.
It is.
And, a home is so important, especially in this situation, where we're at in Halifax. If something happens and you have to lose your home or sell your home, you may not have another place to go. And, I think that's why it's so important to ask these questions. Yeah. And sometimes we get the pushback from borrowers. Like Sandi, as I'm sure you can imagine, borrowers don't like to give us always the full picture, but it's really just so important for both sides. If you've liked what you've heard and you want to learn more, feel free to visit us online at teamclinton.ca.